Because if it's a high density mesh network that's quite active, you're adding and deleting customers quite regularly, it becomes intensive in certain ways. So your topology kind of dictates the components you use. And then we got something I think everybody should be familiar with in this room, it's point-to-point network. Typically in most cases, it's you'll see I said ZR coherent based, but these days we're still seeing a lot of 10G, so that's changing to 100G more often and often. I think some guys are doing a step to 40 gig right now. The interesting thing is the cost between a 40 gig optic and 100 gig optic is at such a point that it's just better to go 100 gig. Your limitation is obviously the backplane on your router, and right, so it's always, Tashi eloquently says it, no free lunch. We get free lunch today. Well, you and I don't, we have to work. But then also, typically what you'll see like banks and big enterprises, they'll do what is called SAN DCI. So they'll use that connectivity between those two nodes to actually duplicate that storage area networks for geographical diversity reasons. So these are the typical topologies used. There are, like you can see here, there are like 3 topologies, hub and spoke, and, but that's more on the access side, that's more how you deliver services to customers, and that if you do access type WDM. But I think for most people in the room, this is the one that everybody would be familiar with, right? Because you're getting traffic and you just need to either between your 2 DCs just replicate and buy some services if it's 10 gigs, 100 gigs. But if you stick around later in the week, I'll show you how to monetize the WDM system. That's always the fun part. Because we joke about it, but WDM, like I said, it's not an inexpensive solution. So if you look at it, the cost of your fiber, yes, WDM extends the fiber, but it's basically the cost of your fiber to put a WDM system on it. Your first services are expensive, but your second, third, and fourth service become cheaper. And it's quicker to scale, easier to scale. You don't have to wait for fiber sign off and all that jazz again. And question O3R prices and that, right? Because, I mean, how long does it take to get a fiber sign off lately? It's close to 2 months. I heard some people. So WDM gives you the ability to rapidly scale. But that's it. That's typically what guys would see, and then maybe some rings if you've got a 3-node DC topology or something like that. So, in the interest of being thorough, so what we see with point-to-point is it's really simple, right? You can have transponder or your transceiver, got AMUX. If the link is to a point where you need to increase the power budget, because we've now learned that there is a power budget, and the light has to be readable, then amplifiers, and it's a line. So topologically, it's 2 nodes, and component-wise, it's very little components, right? It's typically used for data replication, at banks, enterprises, for a lot of you service providers, where you are either peering and you're peering at one DC and you've got to get in another DC to get to that DC, right? It is what it is. It's 2 nodes, nothing funny. Then we get what we call a linear add-drop network. So linear add-drop network, yes, it's a half a circle, because I was not going to do a straight line. I had this image ready, I just needed to delete a line, so I wasn't going to straighten it up. So what happens with a linear add-drop network, right? So we've talked about our components. We've got muxes, and we've got our amplifiers and so forth, and then I quickly touched on the ROADMs. So a linear add-drop network is a methodology of delivering those services. So it could be in a ring, this could be a ring configuration, that's linear add-drop. And what we mean by linear add-drop is we've got no active component routing wavelengths. So every wavelength, where it starts here, and it goes into the filter, at the next filter, that's where it logically stops. Well, physically, not even logically, it physically stops there. And you add traffic, so you take out a frequency, you take it to your electrical layer, be it layer 2, layer 3, whatever floats the boat, and then you add that wavelength again to the next node. Any frequency, so say this router service was destined for there, you have to physically patch through each node. So from mux to mux, you take at that frequency, you take the patch lead, plug it in the frequency, and you patch it to this. So the optical routing is a physical exercise. It is nice and cheap when it comes to component level, because predominantly passive components, except for amplifiers. Management is simple, because you only have to manage a human, which has to document stuff.
That's a problem. That's a big problem.
And you have to have a bunch of updated visual diagrams. So when we talk about in the optical world, we call them signal flow diagrams. So a signal flow diagram is very fun, where an engineer goes and patches the frequency, gets it up. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. He goes back home, and at 3 o'clock he has to remember what frequency it is, and then he draws it on a diagram, right? Sometimes not the case. They'll say the wrong frequency is used, and the next time you deploy someone, they go, but this thing's already patched. So it happens. But this is physical. So immediately you'll see some impacts here, right? Your muxes, and we'll get to that. It's not, even though it's passive, there's a penalty to pay. Here again, free lunch. So that, actually, I like it. So that mux reduces the optical power. It has an insertion loss. So when that optical power goes in, that filter inside there, if it's a thin film filter or whatever type of filter it's built with, that filter has an optical power loss. So your insertion loss from the TX to RX side, or mux to DMux, could be different from your DMux to mux. So that's the fun about it as well. And then because you're going onto a patch lead, now who's ever cleaned a patch lead in their life? Now, you guys are the rare few. We at AdTrain, we have part of our engineering training. There is I think it's a 3-hour module just on cleaning fibers. And it's believe me, it is needed. I've seen guys lick a fiber and do this. I've seen guys, while they unplug a fiber to test, while they're waiting for the RTO to boot up, they take the patch and they put it in their mouths and grip it between their teeth. And all these things have an impact. It has an optical power impact. It has a quality impact of the signal, because you can imagine all the nice little oil and KFC freckles and everything left on that, because I just had lunch before you tested your fiber, right? But this stuff has an impact on your OSNR. So if you ever go down this route, that module's free on our website. I'll share the link on proper ways to clean a fiber. Oki will probably also be happy if you ever want to buy a fiber cleaning kit, Oki is down the road here. But guys, you can't. These are optics, right? So you can't rub it against your shirt. It's not the way to do it. I'll show you a bit later. I'll show you some pictures when we do the fault finding portion of it. How optics can actually damage equipment, especially if you start talking about amplification, and if we touch on Raman amplification, which is a bit of a swear word for most people, but that's the challenge here. You're physically patching this, so you don't know what the quality is of that signal unless you test it with an optical spectrum analyzer. You'll touch base on what one of those are, but it's this thing. So you use it to actually test the signals. You can test the quality of the signal. You can see the modulation. You can do a lot more. But so linear ad-hoc network, basic architecture. Got fixed filters. This one you'll have some amplifiers. You won't even have an amplifier at every node, depending on how the network looks. And any traffic passing through, destined for there. So argument's sake, this is point A, and this is point B for this traffic. So we are using the most right portion of the spectrum. So the traffic is inserted here, we patch it through, and that's the first time it sees the electrical layer again, right? Then, say we had a second optic on here on the most left-hand side of the spectrum. We go into the node, into a transponder or router. So this is called optical, electrical to optical again, so OEO. So you'll hear OEO quite much, or quite a lot when you start playing in the WDM space. So it basically means we're going from optical layer to electrical layer. So when you go electrical, there's an element of latency added. But in this case, so say that second interface goes here, we take that same frequency, we break up, literally like little mirrors that were microns big, and then depending on after it hit the prism, you would tell it traffic has to pass or drop, and it would adjust the mirror to reflect that piece of wavelength down. So that's how it was, right?
That sounds crazy.
So it was mechanical. So it would literally hit the filter, argument's like a prism, take the white light, break it out. That mirror will be aligned to that. And on it would be have a bunch of small mirrors, and it will just adjust it to go back out of the line interface, or it will adjust it to go to the client interface, and it will drop it like that. And then it hits a prism to go max again to combine the light to have a single interface, right? So thank goodness you've got stuff like photosensitive silicon and stuff like that. So same concept though. You've got a photosensitive silicon, and it's like a prism component or a filter component or isolator. And then what happens there is we energize certain portions of that silicon to then reflect the light. Same concept, just less mechanical. So that silicon will then just like have a bunch of fun ridges that reflects the signal to the appropriate interface. So it's literally a photon switch. So it's aware of every signal coming into it. It knows the power of that signal. It knows the frequency. It knows the width of the signal. All that. Any questions on that? Come on, guys. We had like 10 questions on the filters. Now ROADM gets no love. That's it.
We're still getting our minds around it.
That's it. Obviously, it is not a WSS. It's not a cheap component. Because of the amount of stuff that goes into it and the research. So WSSs are different in size. So you can have a 1:4 split, a 1:9 split. You get up to 32 degrees. Then you get, someone's going to kick me when I say this, you get what we call CDC. So it's N to Xmax. So it might have 32 line sides and 32 drop sides, and it gives you the ability to reuse a frequency. So it's contentious, directionless, and colorless type of stuff. That is a very expensive piece of equipment. I think globally, if you look at WDM operators globally, there's probably only 3 operators globally that do CDC. Everybody has it. It's always funny on a tender. Everybody has it on a tender, but they will never buy it because it's way too expensive. Then in ROADMs, you get different type of ROADMs. So you get what is called a root and select ROADM. So root and select ROADM it's got 2 WSS modules. So for argument's sake, let's use our diagram, so 4-degree diagram. So it's the WSS is a 1:4 WSS. And then a 4:1 WSS. So that's a route and select ROADM. Then you get what is called broadcast and select. So what it does is, whatever comes in from the line side, the network side to the client side, it's got a splitter on there, and it will just send that signal to split it to 4 different directions. and then the drop component has to decide how to isolate the signal. And when the signal leaves the system, the WSS then sits on the client to network side, and then that decides if this frequency is a pass-through frequency or it's an add frequency. Can I route it this way? So it isolates it there. Yet again, 2 WSS is more expensive than 1 WSS in a component, but flip side of it is you've got better isolation. You can reproduce signaling. You don't have to isolate. It's just a bit more interesting. So when we start talking about flex grid, the ROADM manages your flex grid because it's aware of your signal width. It's aware of every signal where it's going, and it can broaden the frequency, shorten the make the lane bigger or smaller, right? So it can dictate it. And then you get fun stuff that ROADMs do is they help you balance your signal, because balancing, you'll see when we start talking about planning, balancing your signal leaving your network is a must. Not having balanced signals create unfortunately some nonlinear impairments, which leads to bad OSNR or worse signals. And believe me, if signals aren't balanced, it becomes a nightmare, especially if you've got a multi-op network. But so the ROADM is fully aware of everything. Typical structure, so for argument's sake, fixed add drop, 2 nodes. If you have a 4-degree node, what would happen is you just replicate this picture and you have a bunch of them patched across, right? But it's manual. Every frequency has to be patched across. So typically fixed add drop networks or linear, they're not in a mesh environment. They 2 directions, east and west, not 3 directions, 4 directions, it just becomes a nightmare. When you start talking about multi-directional networks, then a ROADM becomes a bit better. So in a ROADM environment, so we've got east, west, north, south, and your ROADMs are interconnected with each other. And in cases like that, you'll see we've got two setups here. And I'll talk about it. So these ROADMs, as you can see here, sorry for my diagrams, these are WSSs, right? So these are route and select. This is a route and select ROADM. And then what happens is each one of these ROADMs has 4 interfaces. Each of these interfaces is either connected to its neighbor or to a drop direction. So typically, you'll have a drop direction on a ROADM, and then you'll have all your neighboring pass-through connected. So this ROADM will connect to that ROADM for pass-through signals. This one will connect to that one for pass-through signals, and vice versa. And then it will have a drop direction. So now you'll see I said directionless and colorless. What does that mean? So fixed add drop. You're set to that frequency dropping there. And you're fixed to a direction. So your drop traffic comes in, it drops, and then you have to pick it up again. If you're saying directionless, what now happens is I can have a frequency go into the ROADMs, and I can have it broadcasted to all of them. But the ROADMs then isolate the frequency. So when we start talking about protection and restoration, the ROADM then is aware of this frequency being there, and it can route it. It simplifies your drop structure because in a fixed add drop, sorry, I don't know. Sorry, guys. So if this was a 4-direction node, you'd have to replicate this twice, right? Fixed, and then route appropriately. If you've got a router or a transponder that has to pick up the frequency, it's going to a fixed direction. It's dropped here, so it either needs 2 interfaces if it wants protection to go there, or you need to have an optical switch. Or in a ROADM environment, you do what we call you have colorless directionless. So what directionless does is you have still a MUX, but it's now not a conventional MUX. It's called a power splitter module. So basically what this does is it's a splitter. It might have 2 network interfaces, it can have 8 network interfaces, 32, whatever, right? Every time you increase the amount of network interfaces that you have to drive to every node that's in that path to patch the service. With a ROADM, with management or GMPLS control plane, or let's just call it control plane. With control plane, what you can do is you can tell the system, listen, I've got a service, I want it at 100 gigahertz. It has to go from this node to that node along this path. And then the system will do it for you. So then you just have to send a techie to node A, the source node, and to the destination.
Along the path.
Yeah. So that's its benefits. I hear resources are cheap, but resources are also not reliable every time.
Yeah.
So if you've got a metro network and you want to drop ROADM, what's the rule of law?
So again, if
If you've got a metro network, right, and you want to put ROADMs in, where would you typically see ROADMs?
in a metro network at every node.
At every node.
Yeah. No, because you wanna manage the frequencies everywhere, right? So if you've got a mesh metro, and you might have a spur which is isolated off of it. So if we so for argument's sake, if you've got this, but you've got an additional single node hanging off here, that could be a filter. Doesn't need a road because this is the multi-directional node. So you can have at your terminal node, you could have a fixed filter or a broadband filter or power splitter, right? And then, but then you also have to be aware you have to do power management on that frequency and all that jazz. But if you've got multi-directional nodes, typically at every one of those nodes.
And does it come as a line card or does it come as separate lines?
No, it's a card. So typically in any. You want to interrupt?
Lunch is at 1 o'clock.
1 o'clock.
You have to have one of those.
Right. You have to come force me.
Yeah. If you run out, which I don't think so,
No.
you can find.
Some guys might take 2. So you typically, it's a module. So it's a module, depending on the type of system, right? Because each vendor does it differently. But it's a module that would slot into your chassis. But it also depends on how the vendor builds their kit. Because here again, WDM is not WDM. We have a different way from the likes of Nokia and Infinera or ZTE, for argument's sake, or Tijaz, or everybody has a different way of doing it. Because a lot of the WDM vendors are looking at a very specific market. That's why it's also good to have this knowledge, because you might find a vendor that's very good in the DCI space, but when it starts coming to mesh router networks, it might not fit. So it's good to have the basic principles under the knee because it helps you decide on vendor selection. Oh.
Wrong switch.
I almost went to my late night radio voice. Welcome to the sultry sound.
DJ on the sideline.
But so ROADM you'll typically have, and to further answer the question, you'll have a ROADM module per degree. That ROADM will talk to a specific degree. So 4 degree node, 4 ROADM modules. 5 degree node, 5 ROADM modules, etc., etc. Everybody happy with that?
Sorry, and just the degree relevance again?
A degree is, that's a degree. So where it connects to the line.
A direction.
Yeah, direction. Degree direction, essentially. So simplified direction. Then you get your drop degree as well. That's where you drop the traffic. So as you can see, there are many different architectures. You don't have to do directional and colorless. You can just do fixed code. So you can still have a ROADM, but then each one of these ROADMs will have a fixed filter hanging off of them to add to that degree. So then when you want to use a specific degree, you have to physically patch it onto that degree. but your pass-through traffic is routed there. Your drop traffic and add traffic is handled here at the bottom. So it's really horses for courses, guys. It's just like the way you start deploying your network and adding traffic to the network. Happiness. Fun stuff. Okay. So we've got the optical line portion of it. So the stuff that manages frequencies. Now we get to the bane of my existence. Amplification. I'm going to start the conversation because with if the link is bad, you can't just boost. It's not a turbo on a GTI. It doesn't work like that. Power, you can have too little power or too much. It has effects on it. And when you start amplifying, if you've got a data center now and you just have filters, you will not have noise. The stuff that could introduce noise is a dirty patchy, but it's minute. The second we start introducing amplification, we start introducing noise. It's almost like a GTI turbo. It doesn't just take good air, it takes all the air. It makes it more.
And you hear a lot of noise.
Yeah. So, why is amplification needed? I think it's pretty simple, right? If you've bought fiber in South Africa, you know that it's not necessarily all the same. So, what typically happens is you get your LR optics, so 10-kilometer optics and 40-kilometer optics, and people typically confuse that with that distance with power. It's got nothing to do with power; it's dispersion. So the 10-kilometer or 40, so the LR to, or even an SR, which is a few hundred meters, right? What happens there is a certain sensitivity in that optic for dispersion. That is why the kilometer rating is there. It has got nothing to do with a little bit to do with power. So if they say 40 kilometers, I'm looking at Porsche, and 10 kilometers, they mean at 0.25 dB per kilometer. So in totality, 2.5 dB total power. That optic can launch at let's say 0 dB, and it will have a sensitivity of 1 dB each direction, right? It could be 0, it could be -1, or it could be +1, and then on the receiver side, it could vary depending on the optic, the sensitivity of the receiver on it. It could have an outage at -8 dBs, or -18, or -20, or -30. It just depends on, but that obviously has cost impact. The more sensitive the receiver, the more expensive the optic. But when we hear ER optic or gray optics and ER4s and LRs, that is typically what happens there. That said, very few fibers in the metros at this stage are at 0.25 dB per kilometer.
That's much worse than that case.
And when you start talking about WDM, that power loss that's introduced is every connector you go through is a loss. Every component you go through, except for an amplifier, is a loss. The fiber itself attenuates at 0.25 dB, if you're lucky, per kilometer. Every splice on that path, you'll have a loss. Typically, the guys aim for 0.01. Typically, that happens rarer and rarer these days. But so you can imagine in a busy metro where the fiber is quite active, or there's a lot of construction work, fibers get nicked, right? Fiber gets picked up by this big yellow cable finders, and I always laugh at the guys. They're like, "Oh, can I have GIS on my system to see where the fiber's broken?" I'm like, just drive down the road, you'll see where it's broken. Just look for that big yellow thing, or go look for the guy that stands there next to a trench and does this. That's where your fiber's broken. But So in metro specifically, your fiber losses are typically high because that fiber gets repaired more often than not. Wayleaves are incorrect, right? The guys want to upgrade the sewage system. We actually had this in where I stayed down the road here. The guys were supposed to upgrade the sewage system, and the Wayleave said the sewage was on this side of the road. It wasn't. That's where the fiber. The sewage was on this side of this, but they started digging. And it created a nice 2-day long outage for me. But so these things happen, right? So all those splices, all those joints, even when the guy who's ever seen a fiber joint in their lives, I'll try and get a picture. But those big domes, if you ever drive past the manhole, you'll see these big black domes, right? Those are not adult toys, they are there for the fiber. In them are these little trays. So every time they splice a fiber, they pack that fiber in that tray, so they coil them. Even a bad coil could create bends, which introduces attenuation. So you see all these elements that make the fiber not be what it is. So we joke and we laugh and we get mad at the fiber providers about the quality, but a lot of it is really outside their control. And they can only repair it as quickly as they can. You can imagine fixing 144 fiber with a bunch of operators and homeowners screaming at you, and you've got 8 hours to fix it. And it takes about 8 hours. Okay, I saw that. About 8 ure for 144. About 8 hours. A good team takes 8 hours to fix a 144 fiber. So you can imagine those guys do sometimes take shortcuts because you start very early in the morning and you might only end very late or very early the next day, depending on when you get into it. But so all these things do add attenuation, right? So we need a way to actually up the signal when it's low. So impact of out amplification, especially on coherent systems, well, actually on direct detect as well, is lower signals harder to detect. So we talked about it, we're looking for differences in light, so it makes it harder to detect those differences in light when the light is very low. It harder to read. You're sitting with long haul becomes a challenge, right? Anything over 60 kilometers becomes near to impossible. So reach limits. So what amplification does is amplification just restores the optical power, so it energizes the signal. And we'll talk about how amplification physically works now. And then it gives you the abilities to reach 80, 100 kilometers, 120 kilometers. And we've done solutions where we've done spans for a utility company which are 300 kilometers long before we amplify. Much more expensive type of amplifier. Submarine cables, submarine systems, they use different types of amplifiers. Where they've got what's it? ROPA, right? So ROPA amplifier is actually quite an interesting piece of kit, but that's more expensive. But that allows them to travel a few thousand kilometers at good signal quality across the ocean. The fiber is also slightly different. It's not your local fiber that you get down the road put in by your operator, right? They've got very specialized fiber. I think submarine fibers losses something like 0.1 kilometers. But they also manage the way they splice that stuff. But amplification is always a requirement when you start going beyond the 50 kilometers. Also, depending on your optics, because your optics dictate how much power you're putting into the line. So there is when we start talking about ZR optics and transceivers, your cheaper ZR optics are minus 8 dB optics. Your higher end, more expensive optics are a 1 dB or a plus 1 dB optic. Because that thing has a little amplifier in it, it becomes more expensive. So optics on optics, there is differences. So when we start talking about amplifiers, I'm only going to touch on two. There are many. So like I said, you get, okay, I didn't say. So you get EDFA amplification, Raman amplification, then you also get ROPA amplification. ROPA only for ultra long systems like submarine, and very few times it's used in terrestrial, so on the ground, land-based systems. It is very expensive. And it's a very specialized component. So ROPA comes with trade-offs as well. If you can't have the full spectrum, you have less channels because of the noise and so the one you'll typically see is called an EDFA, an erbium doped fiber amplifier. So what happens, right, is yes. But my back turned and I heard someone whisper and like, fuck, I'm stepping something. So EDFAs, you typically see them for your CNL band. So DWDM. There are some guys that claim that you can amplify C-band. They can, but like I said, the trade-off is not worth it. So typically you'll see it for C-band and L-band. Depending on the OEM, it could be a combined module, it could be two different modules. Yet again, each OEM has a different approach of how they address the two bands. So what's called an erbium doped fiber amplifier is, if we look at this nice drawing here, this, I had to steal this, because I do not draw diagrams like this. You'll see here is a piece of fiber in a little spool or a ring, and it's green. So it's doped in erbium, literally dipped in erbium. So erbium is a rare metal. It's highly active. I didn't want to say radioactive, but it is it's not like radium, right? It's just slightly lower, and cesium and those things. But so what happens is, basically, if you look at an amp, you have your receive side, so coming from the filter, or the line side, depending on if it's a preamplifier and booster amplifier, and I'll touch on the difference between the two. You'll have your signal receive unamplified on the left. Then you'll have a coupler. That coupler will probably add a monitor port so that you can monitor the incoming signal strength. It will then have, in more modern components, it will have a photodiode or a power monitor that actually tells you the total power. Doesn't tell you per frequency, it gives you the total power. So remember, I talked about total power and power to spectral density. So it'll tell you the total power coming in, because an amplifier looks at the entire spectrum for the C-band or L-band. Doesn't look at individual signals. So it amplifies everything. So if the signal is not used, but there's a small peak and there's noise on it, guess what's happening? It's amplifying the noise as well. So it amplifies the entire spectrum. Then you have you'll have a controller. If you've got an amplifier that has variable gain settings. So fixed gain is, this amplifier is a 20 dB amplifier. You switch it on, it sits at 20 dB. It amplifies everything with 20 dB, that's it. A variable gain amplifier, you can actually tell it how much the amplification should be. Is it 16 dB? Is it 17 dB? Is it 21 dB? Is it 30 dB? Whatever. But you can tell it what you want your gain to be. Then it's got what we call a pump laser. So it's a laser that sits in the C-band, and that laser has got a little Y cable onto that erbium doped fiber, and it sends photons into that erbium doped fiber. So what the erbium does is, the pump laser, for argument's sake, let's stay at 20 dB. That pump laser sets at 20 dB and it pushes photons into the fiber, that erbium fiber, at 20 dB. So now, the erbium actually makes the photons greasy. It super agitates them. So those photons are sitting there and they're jumping, they're waiting for shit to happen, right? And then your unamplified signal comes on and it hits the pump photon in that erbium dome. in here. It hits that photon that's sitting there agitated. And as it hits that fiber, it decides, yeah, I've got you now, run. And it just leaves there for a practical step. So it's like a relay almost. You've got this excited photon, it's waiting for an old photon to hit it, and then it starts running with it, right?
Yeah.
And goes up the fiber onto the coupler, pops on. I hope I did that.
That's good.
I almost ran into the wall.
Well done.
Got up in my-
These are
Hey, listen. I weigh 120 kilograms. You do that distance, get me moving, right?
It's like a dance move or something.
Guys, it's like I always joke, right? I'm not a Ferrari. I don't get full speed, right? I'm more like a diesel. It takes me time to get there, and when I get there, it takes effort to stop. But
Marco photo.
so pretty simple, right? And then it leaves the fiber. Then you will see there's an isolator and a coupler. And these isolators and couplers will typically also be fixed to the spectrum. So to not allow anything outside the spectrum to influence it. So you'll see amplifiers will be set to a specific band. And it will only stay in that band, and anything outside that band would get cut off, would get ignored. That said, like I said, if you've got noise on your fiber, it's going to amplify the noise as well.
Yeah.
So when you start playing with your network and designing it, and we'll get to that in the design phase of this, is you have to now learn each amplifier has different noise points, noise figures, impacts on noise. So it becomes fun. Amplifiers, as much as I love them, they introduce noise. If you go through a typical amplifier, Rainer help me, right? It's like a normal amplifier, typically 2-3 dBs of noise introduced on your SNR. More or less. Yeah, if you're a happy space.
Yeah.
If you overdrive an amplifier, guess what? You're making more noise than is worth. If you underdrive an amplifier, you're not getting out of the noise floor. So it becomes a bit of a fun, but we'll talk about that when we get to designing a bit more. Okay, everybody happy with EDFAs? So what does the EDFA stand for?
Opium.
Opium, huh?
Opium. The opium duct, the signals are exact. Cool. So where is it typically used? So you'll see we've got 3 terms here: inline amplifiers, preamplifiers, and booster amplifiers. So an inline amplifier side. So for argument's sake, you've got a data center interconnect. So you've got node 1 with your traffic, node B with your traffic, but your span is 100 kilometers long. You're not going to put traffic components in the middle of that again at 50 kilometers, right? Because it's expensive. You don't want to go buy another router and another filter set and all that, right? So an inline amplifier is literally what it means is that node in the middle at 50 kilometers will just have an amplifier with a chassis and management components, right? But then it will literally have some few filter components, it will get whatever it gets and it just amplifies it long. That's an inline amplifier. Then booster amplifiers. So booster amplifier is at the node that the signal leaves, I boost the signal. So I'm going to go high into the fiber. So I'm going to launch high into the fiber. So because I know the fiber has got a long haul. Then a pre-amplifier is basically an amplifier that sits before your node on the receive side, and it amplifies the signal that you get. But there is an impact on deploying it. It again, hopefully lasts, right? So if you've got a 2-node solution and you want to amplify, your signal has to be amplified. So in this case, right? Almost lost. So in this case, right, you've got 2 nodes. I'm drawing. In this case, right, you've got the 2 nodes. The fiber's loss is 30 kilometers, so we know our optics are going to make it. We need to place an amplifier. A booster amplifier will sit here, and a preamplifier will sit here. If it was you, where would you place the amplifier? Let's say the distance is fine and EDFA could make it. It's a single span, it's not a fast span, but it's just out of the range of the optic, right? And we only need to add one amplifier. Do we add a booster amplifier or a preamplifier? Preamplifier. The reason? Remember, amps introduce noise.
The signal is clear.
If my filter, remember I said if you just have a filter, there's very few things that can introduce noise, right? But if I put a booster amplifier, I introduce noise at the beginning of my link. And that will have an impact on my signal quality at the end of it, because I've introduced noise. The amplified noise frequencies have a negative effect on my actual signal. So what you want to do is you always want to pre-amplify first and then put a booster if you can't reach the power on the other side. Because you don't, it's not either or, right? It's not, okay, it's either or, it's either and or. So it's boost amplified, pre-amplified, or both. But when you're designing, start with a pre-amplifier, because if I just have a filter, I'm going into the line, I've got no additional noise introduced. So by the time I get to this node, I'm amplifying more or less only signal with a very little noise floor. As where I would introduce noise and the signal power drops as it goes, and now I have to filter the good signal from the noise. So just a good tip if you ever get into that point is do that. But it's never either or. Okay, then let me see if I can do. I think let's break for lunch, because Raman amplification is a 10-minute discussion in its own right. Cool.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. The name confuses us.
Yeah.
What is pre?
Pre is before the node. Booster. So
It's actually post amplification.
Yeah, it's actually post. That's what we were saying. It's actually post.
it's pre. Boost is I boost into the fiber. Pre is I pre-amplify at the node.
Pre after post.
This is on the.
At the end, yeah.
On the opposite end.
Yeah.
So it's on the receiver of the other side. So booster, think of it this way. A booster sits on the transmit.
Yeah.
Pre sits on the receive.
Yeah. Pre.
Ja, maar als je audio
Pre-receive.
pre-amp.
Oh.
Yes, it's pre. It's pre-receive.
Ja, zo laat ik het
I agree.